War changes people in ways they do not expect. When I left for my business trip, I knew what I was doing. I kissed my wife, Emily, and hugged my 2 children, Jason and Lily, before boarding the plane. "I'll be back," I promised, looking into Emily's tearful eyes. "Just wait for me." She nodded, her hands trembling in mine, and I left, believing I would return to the life I had built. But the war had other plans. Our unit was deep in enemy territory when we were ambushed. Explosions shook the ground, gunfire tore through the air, and in this chaos I was wounded. The pain was sharp, then everything went black. When I woke up, I was not on the battlefield, but in a cold, dark room, with my hands tied, my head throbbing. I was in captivity. For months I endured the worst. We were kept in cages like animals, fed with scraps, beaten whenever they wanted. I lost track of the days, clinging to the thought of Emily and the children. "Just hold on," I told myself. "They are waiting." They weren't waiting at home. I didn't know it yet, but the army considered me missing in action. No body, no signs of life. Only a letter to Emily saying that I was gone. She grieved, cried, and held on to hope for a while. But loneliness is cruel. And my younger brother, Ryan, was there. He comforted her. And soon the consolation turned into something more. I did not know what was happening at home while I was trapped in this hell. Every day was a battle for survival. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, the cold penetrated my bones, and the guards were happy to remind us how hopeless our situation was. But I refused to break down. I thought about Emily, Jason, and Lily. I imagined them waiting and praying for me to come home. But Emily wasn't just waiting. She was grieving. When the military told her I was missing, she refused to believe I was dead. She held on to hope, clung to the idea that I might still be out there somewhere. But hope can be a painful thing. The more time passed, the more people told her to move on. My parents, her friends, they all thought she needed to accept the truth. And Ryan was always there for her, stepping in where I couldn't. Ryan and I have always been close. He was my younger brother, whom I took care of all my life. I never thought he would betray me. But loneliness can make people do things they never imagined. At first, it was just long conversations. Late nights, when Emily would cry on his shoulder, when he would comfort her, when they would talk about me. Then he started helping with the kids, fixing things in the house, filling the space I left behind. And at some point, these lines became blurred. The guilt was certainly present. Emily told herself it was wrong, Ryan told himself he was just helping. Until one night they stopped fighting it. I don't know exactly when it happened, when my wife and my brother crossed that line. Maybe it was the night she broke down after putting the kids to bed, sobbing on Ryan's chest. Maybe it was the night he stayed with us because the house felt too empty without me. Or maybe it was just a slow, inevitable pull that neither of them had the strength to resist. At first it was secret. They told themselves it was just comfort, just warmth on lonely nights. But soon it became something more. More than stolen moments and whispered apologies. Emily stopped feeling guilty every time she kissed him. Ryan stopped hesitating when he reached out to her. Meanwhile, I was still breathing. Still alive in that dirty cell, still holding on to the thought of home. My love for Emily and my children kept me sane, kept me from succumbing to despair. I imagined her sleeping alone in our bed, waiting for me. I had no idea that she was no longer alone. The military almost declared me dead, and eventually even Emily started to believe it. She spent months drowning in grief, raising our children alone, waking up to an empty bed. And Ryan was there, always ready to pick up the pieces. Then, one night, she stopped pretending that I would come back. She looked into my brother's eyes and allowed herself to love him. And just like that, my place in her life disappeared. In captivity, time passed differently for me. Days and nights blurred together, the only constants being hunger, pain, and incessant thoughts of home. I dreamed of Emily's voice, Jason's laugh, Lily's tiny hands wrapped around my fingers. These thoughts helped me to live. But at home, life was moving forward without me. At first, Emily and Ryan tried to keep everything a secret. Maybe it was because of guilt, or maybe they were afraid of what people would say. But in a small town, secrets don't last long. My parents noticed how often Ryan was around. Friends whispered about how Emily looked at him. Eventually, even Jason, barely old enough to understand, asked why Uncle Ryan was spending so much time in the house. Yet they kept going, convincing themselves that it was normal. I was not there. They were not harming anyone. And the more time passed, the more they allowed themselves to believe they were doing nothing wrong. Then, one night, Ryan didn't leave. And the next morning, he was still there. Jason and Lily woke up to find their uncle sitting at the breakfast table, pouring their mom coffee, just like I used to. And then Emily made a decision. She wasn't just grieving anymore. She was moving on. And then the phone rang. A call she hadn't expected. A call that changed everything. I was alive. Emily almost dropped the phone when she heard these words. "Mrs. Carter, we have news about your husband." Her heart stopped. For months she had been trying to let go, to come to terms with the fact that I was gone. Now, suddenly, the past she'd buried was making its way back. She couldn't even finish her sentence. "He's alive!" Silence. She felt Ryan's gaze on her, saw his face turn pale. The world around her blurred, as the officer had explained on the phone. "I was found during a military raid on an enemy camp. Exhausted, wounded, but alive. They were taking me home." She should have been relieved. She should have been ecstatic. And part of her was. But the other part of her, the part that let Ryan into her bed, into her heart, was drowning in panic. Ryan stood up, his hands shaking. "He's coming back?" Emily nodded slowly. Reality was crumbling around them. The life they had begun to build together was no longer real. It was based on loss, on grief, on a lie that neither of them had questioned. But I was not dead. I was alive. And I was coming home. I don't remember much about the rescue itself. One moment I was barely hanging on, stuck in this nightmare, and the next, my soldiers pulled me out. The sun was burning my skin when I finally came out. My body was weak, my mind was struggling to believe that it was real. But it was real. I was coming home. The flight back was like a dream. I kept fingering my wedding ring, the one that hadn't been taken from me. I imagined the look on Emily's face when she saw me, how she would throw herself into my arms, how Jason and Lily would cry and hold on to me as if they would never let go. I had no idea what I was coming back to. At home, Emily and Ryan were unraveling. As soon as she hung up the phone, she locked herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, seeing the truth of what she had done staring back at her. Ryan sat in the kitchen with his hands in his hair, thinking about something of his own. What am I going to do when I find out? Will I ever be able to forgive them? Emily wanted to believe that she could fix everything, that I would come back and everything would be back to normal. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She had made a choice, and now she had to face the consequences. And when my plane landed on American soil, I was still blind to all of this. I was just a man returning home to my wife and children. A man who thought that love was waiting for him. As soon as I got off the plane, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The air was different, fresh, familiar. It smelled like home. Soldiers stood around me, some reunited with their families, others waiting for transportation. My heart was pounding as I searched the crowd. Then I saw her. Emily was standing a few feet away, clutching Jason and Lily's hands. Her face was pale and her eyes were red. She looked like she had seen a ghost. And in a way, she had. "Daddy?" Jason broke out first, rushing to me. I barely had time to drop my bag before he crashed into me, his little arms clutching my waist. I picked him up off the ground, holding him close. Lily followed me, her tiny hands reaching for me as she sobbed into my shoulder. Emily was slower, her lips trembling, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When she finally took a step forward, I didn't hesitate to pull her into my arms, breathing in the smell of her hair, the warmth of her body. "I've missed you," I whispered, clutching my throat. She hesitated, then buried her face in my chest. I missed you too. But something was wrong. I could feel it in the way she held me, too tense, too hesitant. She was happy to have me back, but something lingered in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? I didn't know. But I would soon find out. The first few days back were a blur. I was home, but something felt off. I chalked it up to adjusting, to the months of captivity, to the nightmares that still woke me up in a cold sweat. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Emily was different. She smiled, she kissed me, she said all the right things, but there was a hesitation in her touch, a distance in her eyes. And Ryan, he barely looked at me. The man who had been my best friend, my little brother, suddenly had nothing to say. It didn't make sense. I was exhausted, trying to piece my life back together, trying to make up for lost time with Jason and Lily. But in the quiet moments, when Emily thought I wasn't looking, I saw it. The way she avoided my gaze, the way she flinched when I touched her, the way guilt wrapped around her like a second skin. Then one night, I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, her hands shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice still rough from months of silence. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "There's something I need to tell you." My stomach twisted. The way she said it, the way her voice cracked, it wasn't small. It wasn't something I could brush off. Then she lifted her eyes to mine, and I saw the truth before she even said it. And just like that, my homecoming turned into something else entirely. Emily's lips parted, but for a moment, no words came out. She just stared at me, eyes filled with something between fear and sorrow. My heart pounded as I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. Then she whispered it. "I was with Ryan." The words knocked the air from my lungs. I blinked, sure I had misheard her. "What?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't think you were coming back." Her voice cracked. "I thought you were dead." I stood there, frozen, as the world shifted beneath my feet. Ryan. My own brother. My wife. I clenched my fists, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. "How long?" My voice was eerily calm, but inside, I was burning. Emily swallowed hard. "A few months after they told me you were missing." She wiped at her face. "I held on for as long as I could, but I was lost. And Ryan, he was just there." I turned away, staring at the wall, breathing hard through my nose. Betrayal dug into my chest like a knife. I had spent every second in captivity holding on to her, onto the idea of our family. And all that time, she had been holding on to someone else. And not just anyone. My brother. I clenched my jaw. "Where is he?" Emily hesitated, but she knew she couldn't lie now. "He's coming over. He wanted to talk to you." Talk? I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk. Or if I wanted to break his damn face. The knock on the door came sooner than I expected. My whole body tensed, anger simmering just beneath my skin. Emily stood near the kitchen, her arms wrapped around herself, like she was bracing for impact. I opened the door. Ryan stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like a man walking toward his own execution. He wasn't the carefree kid I had left behind. He looked older, heavier with guilt. His eyes met mine, and for a brief second I saw it, shame. "Hey," he said quietly. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know what to say." "Try explaining why you slept with my wife," I said, my voice steady but cold. He flinched, but he didn't look away. "I never meant for it to happen. I swear. I was just trying to be there for her, for the kids. And then, it got complicated." "Complicated?" I let out a hollow laugh. "You were my brother." My hands shook at my sides. "You were supposed to protect them. Not take my place." Ryan's eyes darkened. "I didn't take your place." His voice rose slightly. "I was just trying to help. I loved her too." I moved before I could stop myself. My fist crashed into his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. He caught himself, wiped at his mouth, but he didn't hit back. He just stood there, breathing heavily. Emily cried out behind me. "Stop it!" Ryan straightened, looking me dead in the eye. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick with regret. "But I can't take it back." I clenched my fists, my whole body shaking. I had survived war, I had survived hell, but this? This was something else entirely. I had come home. But nothing was the same.